Most survival horror games, most notably the genre's founding father and poster child Resident Evil, give you moments to breathe, to feel safe. Maybe a comforting soundtrack here, a secure room there, or a situation that leaves you fully in control and well within your capabilities. Some games even say f it and just go all out on the action and leave the horror behind entirely towards the end. Well, and Silent Hill gives you almost none of that. There are hardly any breaks on the horror, no cozy safe rooms, and no soothing or even encouraging music. Especially the Team Silent games are full on terrifying horror, or depression, nearly the whole way through, which separates them greatly from less intense survival horror games like Resident Evil or The Evil Within. But how do they pull this off? How do they differentiate themselves so much from other horror games? How do Silent Hill games succeed in never making you feel safe? The first element we have to look at is the literal lack of safety and predictability. And this doesn't mean that other games make you feel particularly safe or particularly predictable, but just that Silent Hill is on another level of not being that. And I know, being less safe sounds like a pretty obvious answer to the question why you don't feel safe. But hear me out. Resident Evil's famous safe rooms provide an amazing break from the horror that lies outside. They have a relaxing soundtrack, an item box full of resources to restock, provided you actually have some, and a save from enemies. Outside there are the usual horrors you'd expect in a Resident Evil game, but inside it's just safe. In Silent Hill, you don't have that. You just save somewhere, it doesn't feel safe, you actually aren't safe, it's sure as hell not cozy, and you can't restock your resources there either. It's just cold and lonely. I mean, to be fair, it's rather unlikely that you're going to get attacked by an enemy while saving, so most of the time it's going to be pretty similar to a Resident Evil safe room, but it can still happen. So you are also literally never as safe as you are in many other horror games, and that transforms the whole atmosphere around it. There isn't that much more of an actual risk in these situations, but it still feels unusual and it doesn't offer the comfort of the expected safety you usually have in such rooms in survival horror games. But apart from that, there are also the hundreds of locked doors per game. It's actually insane how many locked doors there are, and it also makes you feel like you are going insane because you're just running around trying every door and everything is just locked or broken. Except for one unexpected door to suddenly open. Silent Hill is infamous for this whole exploration thing with the doors, but it adds a lot to not feeling safe because it's just so unusual and unpredictable again. When we look at Resident Evil, we can basically access every single room sooner or later, and that adds comfort and certainty. In Silent Hill it's the opposite. The massive load of inaccessible rooms just feel weird and uncanny, because it defies the normal expectations of rooms being enterable. Additionally, there's also the shock when you are finally able to enter a room, because you just aren't used to it after having the previous 10 doors be either broken or locked. And of course, there's also a 50-50 possibility that you're going to face something terrible in there, so that doesn't necessarily help to reduce the tension either. Overall, these two aspects do a lot already to create an underlying feeling of uneasiness and danger, because it's just so different from what most players expect when playing a survival horror game. Another element is the fact that apparently a lot of you haven't subscribed yet, even though you watch the videos. So please do so if you're enjoying this one. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Sorry. Another element are the fantastic visuals and environmental designs. I don't think I even have to mention how good the art direction of Team Silent was. Obviously, there's the stereotypical fog and the dark, sometimes even hellish colors that help to obscure enemies and do a lot to disorient the player. And obviously, there are also the disturbing other worlds that already make you feel uncomfortable before the enemies even show up due to the gruesome graphics. Silent Hill's art design simply set a new standard back in the day, is still very effective even in this day, and works perfectly to capture the dread and tension the games want to convey. But more interestingly, the visual direction makes Silent Hill, and I'm speaking of the town for a change, feel alive. Areas slightly change over time, or very drastically in a short period of time. The town actively chooses where you should go next with different obstacles, and everything seems to react to the things you do. The town itself and the locations connected to it just have a lot more personality and horror to them, because it isn't just a random building filled with monsters, but an actually entity with goals, making everything feel even less comforting and safe. I mean, I think everyone agrees that you wouldn't feel particularly safe if your house tried to attack you, right? The visuals aren't the only standout aspect when it comes to the presentation though, because the audio design is just as good and unique. Horror games in general are very dependent on the sound to make them scary, and a lot of horror games do feature great audio design, but Silent Hill is pretty much at the top and arguably in a league of its own compared to other games from the late 90s and early 2000s. There are obviously Yamaoka's iconic soundtracks, including the ear-piercing industrial sounds from Silent Hill 1 and 3, and the dreamlike songs from Silent Hill 2, that already top most other shit and do a fantastic job at conveying the intended emotions. But the real star are the ambient sounds. The sounds of walking on the rusty, metallic floors of the other world, opening cranky doors, and the noises most enemies produce are simply very unpleasant and terrifying. I have played lots of horror games and there has been basically no single moment that actually managed to surprise me in the way the sound design of Silent Hill games did. I mean, just listen to the pendulum from Silent Hill 3. That shit is just ugh. Yet another unique sound is the trademark radio static when an enemy is near. Although it does sound pretty gnarly for a radio, the sound itself isn't too bad. But it creates lots of tension and dread nonetheless, because once you hear it, you know an enemy is near. You know it's potentially very dangerous, but you can't see it yet, or maybe you just don't want to fight it but can't retreat either. Normally, you would only connect these feelings with the sight or sound of the enemy, but now you also do when hearing the radio static, which makes it an additional source of horror. Once you hear it, you feel the tension of the enemy, even if it's not there yet, letting the feeling of safety slip even further away. At last, there's also the lack of real hype music when fighting enemies or especially bosses, which isn't as significant of a point, but I still wanted to mention it. Other games like Resident Evil or Dead Space have super epic themes when fighting the bosses that make you feel like some kind of action hero. Silent Hill has noise. Just terrible noise. Which makes you feel even worse and induces even more tension. Nice. But speaking of fighting enemies, we have to talk about the combat and the last element of today. Mastering the art of literally destroying anything in your way is a big part of why many survival horror games tend to feel rather safe in the second half, because there's no reason to be scared anymore if nothing can touch you. But luckily, this isn't the case in Silent Hill, because in Silent Hill, you will never feel like you mastered the combat, or at least not like in Resident Evil and such. Pretty much every single game in the series feels somewhat clunky and unsafe when fighting. Enemies will move weird and inconsistent, melee weapons won't have enough range occasionally, guns don't have the desired impact in some moments, and there's a chance you will be overwhelmed even towards the end. The games never let you feel like the superhero in an action movie, but rather like a normal person trying to survive the most f***ed up shit they will ever experience. And that's not only because of bad controls or annoying enemies, but also because the monsters are much more than just monsters. Since Silent Hill 2, almost every enemy represents the guilt and emotions of the protagonist, making every encounter feel a bit, or a lot, more personal than they usually would. There are many good examples for this in the series, but my favorite is probably Abstract Daddy from Silent Hill 2. The model is already very disgusting, but knowing the context behind it causes the fight to feel a lot more emotionally haunting, especially if you're in a similar position as the characters in the game. This also changes the whole atmosphere after the fight is over. In games like Dead Space, you feel amazingly victorious after defeating a boss. Here you just feel kind of empty and hopeless after certain fights. The usual safety and comfort after beating a boss in other games is just not here in the same way. Of course it's nice to progress, but you will also just dive even deeper in the disturbing and depressing world of Silent Hill. So my conclusion seems as obvious as in the beginning. Silent Hill never feels safe because it actually never offers safety in the way other horror games do. Neither in the gameplay, story or even the presentation. But what do you think about this? Or do you even agree with me at all? Please let me know in the comments. Apart from that, I would also appreciate if you subscribe, like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you and see you next time!